Hello everyone, this is Rick, and welcome to Astral Club. This episode is the Astral Law of One. Before I get into it, got some new patrons. Brittany Wright is an Astral Master, and Mila is also an Astral Master. And I thank them for their support. And if you'd like to support Astral Club on Patreon, you get videos early. You get an email where we can talk back and forth, and sometimes special Patreon content. And there'll be a link in the description, along with links to my playlists. If you like the episodes with aliens in space, or time travel, or Astral Guide School, or the question and answer episodes, or you got nothing to do all weekend, and you just want to sit there and listen to all the episodes, well, you can start it on the playlist and listen to them all. If that's something you've got nothing else better to do, there you go. I get questions on a regular basis, and I got some just recently. And I think a lot of it has to do with spiritual philosophies. Even if you don't consider yourself religious, chances are you have been influenced by the Judeo-Christian spiritual philosophy, where the good folks go to an eternal paradise and the bad folks go to the hot place. And it's part of your just basic unconscious or subconscious mind, I think, sometimes, even if you're not religious. And it causes questions because when I talk about things on the astral plane, they just don't seem to match up. The physical plane doesn't seem to match up either with this basic philosophy of the good being rewarded and the evil being eternally punished. And I think a lot of it has to do with, I don't believe that the Judeo-Christian spiritual philosophy is the most accurate when it comes to reality. Instead, I'd like to talk about the Law of One. This was information that I read about years ago, and it came across in the raw material, which is some channeled material. This is material that came to some person or persons that had tuned into higher intelligences. Now, I think one should be skeptical of any information like that, but if it bears itself out time and time again, you have to think about it. Anyway, the central theme of the Law of One is that rather than good and evil, there are two basic philosophies: service to self and service to others. Now, the Law of One says that we are all one, and that both of these orientations will eventually all lead to the same place, because we are all one. Now, in the service to other philosophy, it says that your orientation is to serve others. And that is your basic belief system. And you even sacrifice yourself and your interests to serve your brothers and sisters, because we are all one. And that is a philosophy that is very much in your mind. The service to self orientation takes a little bit longer, I think, to get to that place. But it's also a viable alternative. It's service to self, which means your primary orientation is to serve yourself. And if you serve yourself well enough, you will eventually serve your brothers and sisters as some sort of a side effect. And that either one of these philosophies can allow the individual involved to progress if they are really good at those particular philosophies. Now, let me give you some examples, and you know how I like to talk about the physical and the astral because they tend to mirror one another. And a lot of this happened because I got a question recently, and they were asking about the master. They had just watched the video where I mentioned that the master, otherwise known as Gulam, had a choice at one point. He could have progressed to the mental plane, but instead he decided to stay in the mid-astral because he wished to attract this worship of all of these worshipers. He wanted to experience that particular situation. And this questioner, and I could tell they were obviously influenced by the Judeo-Christian belief system. He said, how could someone like this, who is evil, how could he somehow progress to this mental plane? And I could tell that the mental plane was on some level, some sort of a stand-in for heaven. And the reason this person, who was very intelligent, was confused, I think, is because what I said wasn't squaring with this basic spiritual belief system that has been spread all throughout the world, and certainly the West over the last 1,000 or so years. And it's very easy to explain because the Judeo-Christian spiritual philosophy is very simplistic and it's full of holes. Now, I don't mean to insult anyone, but think about this for a second. And I'll get into more of the Law of the One in a minute, but I want to really think about the Judeo-Christian spiritual philosophy. On the surface, it seems fair, and if you don't think about it any further, fine. The good people go up, the bad people go down. But is anyone you know all good or all evil? No. I mean, I think we all have positive and negative influences in us. As humans, we are flawed instruments. We improve, we get better, but we have imperfections. And I think you'd be hard put to find any examples, or certainly very many examples in your life where you can say this person is pure evil with no redeeming characteristics, or this person is pure good with no faults whatsoever. And that's always been a problem for me too, even as a kid, because I remember asking, well, okay, I know I'm imperfect. Well, am I going to go to heaven? No one could really give me a good answer. So I would ask questions like, well, I'm not pure good, but like what amount of goodness do I need to get to heaven versus bad things that I've done? I mean, do you have to be like 90% good and 10% bad and you get in? Or can you be like 51% good and 49% bad and you get to go upstairs? You know, what's the dividing line there? And no one could ever really give me a good answer. You can go back to the ancient Egyptians, and they even struggled with this. And apparently what their answer was that your heart would be weighed by the god of the dead after you passed away. And based on the weight of your heart would decide your eternal destination. And if you think about it, I guess we've replaced that god of the dead with some Judeo-Christian god who I guess would somehow be responsible for weighing your heart to determine. There just seemed to be a huge amount of holes in that basic philosophy. So let's get back into the Law of One. And I always think the best way to really illustrate a belief system is to use examples that we can all understand, that we're familiar with. So let me grab some examples from history. And I even have one from the present that I believe are individuals who most of us would agree had a service to others philosophy. In other words, they would sacrifice their own interests to help others because they have this philosophy that that is a worthy thing to do. And that within this law of one, by serving the others, they are serving themselves at the same time, because in the law of one, we are all one. Let's start with the Jesus of the Bible. I'm not getting into any religious or beliefs here one way or another, but if you read the Bible, the Jesus as he is presented in the Bible is presented as a selfless teacher who goes about risking his life, being a bit of a rebel within the Jewish religion and irritating the Roman authorities by going around and preaching love and fellowship and amongst the people of that area. Was he perfect? Many would say yes, but even the Bible talks about how when he discovered money lenders and all kinds of sellers had set up in the courtyard of the temple, he became angry and freaked out and started destroying their tables and throwing these things everywhere. And there was birds flying and money falling. So he started a little bit of a riot there based on a temper tantrum. So even the Bible, which is obviously written from the standpoint of this guy is perfect, or as perfect as you can get, they illustrated that he had a temper and that he could at least be pushed to an extreme if certain things occurred. And I think most of us would believe that if you lose your temper and cause a riot, that is an error, that is a deficit in your character. So even the Bible says, hey, he had that problem. Next up is Gandhi. And I think most people would agree that Gandhi sacrificed a good portion of his life fighting for the rights of Indians, first in South Africa, and then eventually going to India and participating in helping India to become an independent state. I'm not very familiar with his life, but I'm quite sure he had some odd characteristics too. I know he liked, I believe, to sleep with younger women, not to have sex with them, but I think he said to test himself. I don't know. It seems odd to me, but I'm not going to judge. The next up is Nelson Mandela. Here's someone who sacrificed decades of his life because he was fighting for equal rights in South Africa for his people. And I don't know enough about him, but I'm sure he was a man and had problems as well. Martin Luther King, another example of a human rights fighter here in the United States, and he fought for equal rights with among African Americans here in the United States of America, and he eventually surrendered his life in that cause. Was he perfect? No, he was a married man who did like women, and so there was some indiscretions there. So, whereas he was someone who performed extremely noble sacrifices for others, he wasn't perfect. And lastly, I want to talk about a person who I just met because YouTube introduced her video to me. And she's called the Filipina P. And I guess YouTube knows that I like watching videos of people who talk about, who live in countries or have experienced extreme conditions or have a culture that is very different from mine. Because I'm very much a student of not only history but humanity, and I'm very interested in this. And she talks about a lot of different things as far as life in the Philippines. And she was interviewing this trike driver. That's a small open air taxi that's got three wheels, and there's just enough room for the driver, and you kind of sit next to him or stand next to him a little bit. And many Filipinos use these types of people to get to the shops and to buy their food. But she was interviewing him and talking and hearing about his life. He was 50 years old, had been driving these things for 22 years. He made 200 pesos a week, which is 12 US dollars. And using that, he had to support his wife and three kids. And so anyway, she goes, okay, we're going to go to the shops because I got to bring some food home. And so he takes her to the shops, and she comes out, and she's about, I don't know, 5 foot, can't be more than 120 pounds. I don't know. She's just, small little Filipina, right? And she has this enormous sack of rice that she sticks in the back of the trike because it has like this little basket. And then she has this big old box of food that she sits on the passenger sections and like sits on top of that. And then they start driving, and she goes, hey, can we meet your family? And sure, he agrees. And so, he takes her there and introduces her to his family, and they sit there and they all smile and take a picture together, and they show him around their very humble shack. And then out of nowhere, at least out of nowhere from my standpoint, she goes, okay, help me unload these groceries. And at first the trike driver was confused. He didn't understand. But she had bought all that food and she was giving it to his family, this poor family. And what really got me, what really humbled me, is that at no point in that interview did it ever occur to me that was what she was going to do. I mean, when I saw that rice come out, I said, listen, I know Asian people enjoy rice, but that looks like a lot of rice for a small woman. But then I guess I just wrote her off as she must be stocking up. I don't know. But it really bothered me that at no point did it occur to me that that's what she was doing. Now, that is an example of someone who is service to others, because to her, it was a natural thing to do. Now, I can always blame it on, well, maybe here in the United States in the West, we always say, oh, well, the government's going to help somebody. I don't have to do it. The government will do it. And I think somehow we've lost something as a people. So these are folks who I think I can use as good examples of service to others. Were they perfect? No. I am 100% sure that every single one of the folks I just talked about, and I gave you a few examples, while primarily service to others, sacrificing to help their fellow man, they weren't perfect. But they understood very deeply that by helping others, they were serving a greater good, and at the same time, serving themselves, because we are all one. Okay, now let's get to the little bit more difficult orientation. So let's talk about service to self. Now, once again, if we are all one, if you serve others, you're serving yourself. If you are service to self orientation, you are also, perhaps a little bit more indirectly, serving others as well, as you are part of the whole. However, we can talk about numerous examples of people that I could talk about who are service to self. And then I'll talk about how they ended up helping others, perhaps indirectly. And then we'll talk about why that orientation perhaps isn't equal to service to others, at least from the standpoint of your chance of progressing. Okay, let's talk about, I could name just about any tech billionaire we've got here in the United States, and I think I can make a pretty good argument that they're service to self. How about Steve Jobs, the founder of Apple? Mark Zuckerberg, the founder of Facebook? Jeff Bezos, the founder of Amazon? Now let's talk about those guys. Okay, Steve Jobs, he created in addition to his partner Steve Wozniak, who doesn't quite get as much press, the company Apple. And I think I can make a pretty good argument that by creating this company, which he wanted to do to create wealth and for his own vanity, he has dramatically helped the world. As a matter of fact, right here in front of me, I have an iPad and I have an iPhone. So he's impacted my life most certainly. And in so doing, he also has created jobs for many thousands of people. So, but what kind of person was he? If you've ever read anything about him, he had a daughter named Lisa who he denied parentage of for years. Had nothing to do with her, despite the fact that there was genetic tests done that proved that he was the father. He was only at one point was only paying $350 a month in child support. When Apple went public and he became a sudden millionaire, being the great guy he was, he upped it to $500 a month. You can't make this kind of stuff up. He was also I mentioned his partner Steve Wozniak. When they first got their first major order, and they got it from some place called the Byte Shop, and they made these Apple One logic boards for this I guess computer shop, and the understanding between Woz and and Steve Jobs was that it's going to be a 50-50 split when they started making some money. But Jobs lied to Woz, and instead it was more of a 90-10 split, 90 for Steve, and he gave 10% to Woz. So here he is, denying a daughter, cheating his partner. And years later, when his partner found out, he was hurt very deeply because he thought he and Steve, had a great relationship. He was also known as a perfectionist, which in and of itself isn't necessarily negative, but there was a lot of people in Apple when Steve was running the show that would take the stairs rather than taking an elevator, because God help you if you got caught in an elevator with Steve Jobs, because he would ask you, what you were working on, and you had better have a very logical, succinct, up-to-date, and expert explanation as to what you were doing, because otherwise you could end up out on the street, which is why a lot of folks would take the stairs rather than risk being caught in an elevator with him. So here's someone who you could say, well, let's be honest, he was a prick. But what he did was, by starting this company, he ended up serving many thousands of others by serving himself. Because of the job creation, because I have these very great devices here now in front of me. Next up, Mark Zuckerberg. I don't want to get too much into him, but I could give plenty of examples of him as well. Obviously, he is the young man who, little hook, little crook, but started up Facebook. Jeff Bezos, you gotta love Jeff Bezos. He created Amazon. I mean, I used to buy books from Amazon when all they used to sell were books. Now the platform's amazing. I mean, it's so easy to order from them, and you can order any darn thing and get it pretty quick. Before COVID, you could get it like just about the next day. But in so doing, he also created many thousands of jobs and created a lot of wealth. Now, many of those jobs, you could argue, are not that far from sweatshops, the way they work these people. But the fact of the matter is, he created this very convenient way to shop, and did create jobs for many thousands of people, and much wealth was created. He himself has, I just checked it up, an estimated $196.5 billion. And that's billion with a B. Let's round it up to 200 billion because it's a little bit easier with the math. Now, there are 2 million estimated homeless people in the United States today. I did a little bit of quick math, and if Steve used his entire fortune, he could buy $100,000 cottage for each and every one of those homeless people. Think about that. He could buy 2 million $100,000 cottages and single-handedly eliminate the homeless problem here in the United States. But what does he do? Instead, he goes ahead and builds a large phallic rocket and shoots himself and Captain Kirk into space. Okay, so these service to self individuals are a lot more fun to talk about because it's a lot easier digging up their picadillos, their faults, because they are extremely selfish people. And selfish people do lots of selfish things, and it makes for good news, which is why you see a lot more news about these people on your TV every night than you do the good people. Because the good people doing service to others, it's boring. Oh, they're working in the soup kitchen. That's boring. Let's talk about Jeff Bezos and his giant phallic rocket ship. That's much more interesting. Okay, so, but what you see here is that, yes, these people are, quote, selfish, and they are service to self. But in so doing, in serving themselves to such a degree that they were so good at it that they ended up serving thousands of others. And you can say, well, yeah, but that's kind of like an indirect trickle-down effect. Okay, but the bottom line is they still serve them. Now, am I saying that service to others and service to self is the same? In one sense, yes, but in a real sense, no. Because it's a lot harder to progress on the astral with a service to self orientation than it is service to others. And it's for this one reason. With service to others, there's no illusion of separation. You see the people you're serving as reflections of yourself. You see on a daily basis we are all one. With the service to self people, they have this strong illusion that they have to combat on some level. That, oh, I am the king, I am the Lord, and the only person that matters is me, and I matter, and I'm the best, and I'm the greatest, and I'm separate from the slime and the scum and what have you. So in order to progress, though, they've got to overcome that illusion because it's a very powerful illusion in the service to self group, which is why when you talk about the mental plane, you see a lot more service to others on the mental plane than you see service to self. Now, Gulam, or the master, he mastered enough to a degree an understanding that by serving himself, he was serving others. He was able to overcome that illusion such that he could have gone on to the mental plane. So I'd like you to, consider this philosophy now whenever you watch these videos, because I think by understanding this Law of One spiritual philosophy, you'll have an easier time making sense of some of the things that happen on the astral plane. Because if you try to apply that typical Judeo-Christian philosophy, you're going to come up with a lot of questions and a lot of misunderstandings because it just doesn't gel with the reality that I've seen on the astral plane. So that was the Law of One and its basic spiritual philosophy. If you liked it, please hit the like button. Send it to those of like minds. If you have any questions or comments, and you always do, please leave them in the comment section. And if you'd like to support the channel on Patreon, there'll be a link in the description. And don't forget those playlists, because you can always find something that you might want to watch again, and if you got some extra time on you. And as always, this is Rick, and I will see you on the astral plane.